rates have ticked back up a little bit. So home affordability is a little bit less than it was 2 months ago. And buyers have to be creative if they're going to get in a house in the second half of 2026. So it's really interesting because there was a new survey that came out by a group called Clever Real Estate. And this survey, the focus on was what buyers are willing to overlook or accept to get a house. So 57% of respondents said, and I thought this was interesting, 57% of respondents said that they would not consider mold to be a deal breaker on a house. So 57% people said, if we found mold during the inspection and that's not necessarily a deal breaker. 49% were willing to overlook the presence of hazardous materials. So like lead-based paint, asbestos. Okay, John, you got a weird look on your face. You were like, wait a minute. We're not talking nuclear materials or anything.
What's that funny canister we found in the backyard?
Yeah, right. No. I think we're talking about... And this got me too. 45% of respondents said they would tolerate structural issues. So it's really, really interesting when you look at this. Now, here's another thing that also recently in the news in our area that really comes into play. Furthermore, the survey found more buyers, only 14% would overlook having a sex offender registered living nearby. So look at that, like structural issues. Buyers are going to overlook at a massive level. Registered sex offenders, not as nearly as likely. And I think we saw that with community reaction around here.
Yes.
Also with the house off of Edison as well. But then living next to an unpleasant neighbor, which I think if you ask most of the neighbors around the firehouse in Richland, that number is only 12% of claimants said that they would consider. So it's quality of life becomes a very, very big issue. Sometimes a larger issue than actually the house itself. And so when we're looking at this and evaluating this data all of the time, number one, my job as a trusted advisor to buyers and our clients is to say, how is this going to impact you, especially if you're a first-time home buyer and you've never bought before?
Yeah.
Because some of these can be major issues. Another thing in the survey to point out that we use in negotiation a lot is that only 12% of respondents said that they would walk away if they discovered a major flaw. That's pretty good odds for people in a transaction. And I think when you find a major flaw like that, it becomes a question of, can this problem be fixed, repaired, or rectified somehow? And I mean, there's so many solutions that you have to work through. And some deals are harder than others. It was earlier in the week, it was one of those awesome real estate experiences where I was driving out of the parking lot. I think it was about 7:00, maybe it must have been like Wednesday night. And we had a closing that earlier in that day. And as I drove out of the parking lot, I was like, this was a great freaking real estate day, because we got a client into a house, a buyer, and it was not our easiest transaction of the year. We had to modify existing structures on the property prior to closing, meaning that there was repair work and stuff that needed to be done that was lender requested before closing. So now what do we have happening? We have to go onto a property and get permission to make modifications on a property that we don't even own, or we have to get the seller to make those modifications. So you have to get permission from the owner to make those changes. Now, what have you done? You've elevated the risk of the entire transaction. Because what if you go in and make those changes to the property and then something else happens? Like say the buyer loses their job. In this case, we represent the buyer. But say the buyer loses their job. now you've made all these modifications to the property that maybe the seller didn't necessarily want in the first place if they were going to end up keeping it. So you've elevated risk. So you have to talk through how are we gonna deal with that risk? How are we gonna make that as low as possible but still get the deal done?
Yes.
We had to change loan programs. The original loan program that the lender said this buyer was qualified for disappeared. And so we had to change loan programs in that situation. We had to talk to county officials to figure out what was allowed or not allowed on the property. End of the day, the property closed. And the reason I was so happy as I was leaving the office is I was like, this is one of those real estate transactions where I know that we've changed that buyer's financial position probably by 5x in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
Meaning that particular buyer, it allowed him to have storage for a business that he was running. It allowed for rental income. It allowed for him to have his personal home at the same time. It truly was one of those deals where you're just like, I had to smile and say like, we just massively changed this person's life throughout the course. But there was a lot of solutions in there. And I think this was one of those cases where we found a major flaw. The buyer was willing to accept that flaw and also make some changes to it to make it better so that it was fixed by the time we got through closing. And so one of the things that I think buyers need to be aware of is what is actually major. Like, because we get caught up in this a lot where a buyer is like, gosh, we did that inspection and that bedroom was yellow and I really thought it was, sunshine yellow, not marigold yellow.
Yeah.
And you're like, please tell me this cannot be the reason why we're not moving forward on this, on this deal. That's not a major item in our real estate book, or even in my opinion. So what is major? Structural. Regardless of what this survey says, that 45% will consider accepting a structural defect, that you need to know exactly what that defect is and how that's affecting the house moving forward.
Yes.
If there's a structural issue, that needs to be evaluated by a structural engineer. Failed roofs. Failed roofs are a huge one that are super expensive. They're a major system and they protect all the other systems in the house.
Yes.
That one's bad. So we're going to have all kinds of other massive issues. Failed septic are super expensive and also an issue. Water intrusion is a big one. I mean, we can't have lakes in the crawl spaces. Down below, swimming pools do not belong in crawl spaces. I've actually seen one of those in a North Richland house, but that's a whole nother radio show.
Wow.
We did find an old swimming pool in a property where they built an addition
on top of it
over the swimming pool.
Wow.
Somebody out there listening knows which house I'm talking about. And then the last thing is active electrical sparking. There shouldn't be sparks when you turn off, at the junction boxes or the wiring when you turn the breakers on. So those are some of those major issues that we're going to have to get addressed. And the biggest thing that I find that is worse than all of that is a buyer will almost never overlook failed trust or fraudulent disclosure by a seller.
Ooh.
And it's not always on purpose, but if there's even the indication that is the case, that is the fastest way to get a buyer out of a transaction. If they think that the seller was concealing something or hiding something, or they find out that they knew about something that was not mentioned to them, what it does is it gives that uneasiness feeling in the transaction, and it makes the buyer naturally think, what else is there that I don't know about?
Yeah.
And so almost every time when that happens, we see transactions fail because of that. And so that's another big one that we're always looking out for in a transaction. Was there a break in the trust factor with the seller? 'Cause you don't have to like the seller, but you have to have a certain amount of trust that they filled out those disclosures honestly, that they are, giving you an accurate picture of what the property actually is. The second that a buyer thinks that's not happening, we're usually on to another property or backing out of that deal. So what are some of the things that based upon that survey that buyers are not willing to overlook? And so interestingly enough, 93% of buyers said they would not purchase on the same street as a long-term construction project. So that makes a lot of sense, right? So think, new hospital being built or new school being built. It's hard as these neighborhoods expand, and you can think about things in Tri-Cities like that, or maybe a big apartment complex is going in near, a mixed-use development that also has single-family homes. That is a huge turnoff for buyers, and especially based upon this survey. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Noise from construction is number one. Traffic. I've lived in new construction neighborhoods before because when you're a real estate agent, that's just what happens. Like you're like, oh, I can move into this neighborhood and then sell a bunch of those houses while I'm here. And then I'll move. Oh, that's a great deal. So I'll move over there. My wife's going to kill me sometimes because, we're always moving around. But one of the things about it is construction can be annoying. When you're used to it's a big difference if you live in the end of a cul-de-sac and you're like, hey, kids, go ride your bikes out in the cul-de-sac and run around the streets. Well, as soon as you've got, loaders and dozers and excavators and, you're not doing that. So there's some inconvenience factor with that. Also living next to power plants. Yeah. And also more, I want to have somebody on the show to talk about this that knows a lot more about it than I do. But along with power plants, it's been in the news like crazy here locally, nationally as well too, is this combines kind of power plant and long-term construction is buyers don't want to live next to data center construction. Yeah. I know it's necessary for the new economy and what's happening. And, there's a lot of arguments about how many of these we need and what we need from them to continue to be a world technology leader. But I can tell you from a residential standpoint and having those buyers in our cars and going around with us is if there's a long-term construction project, data center, power plant type thing going on, buyers are asking to find a different neighborhood for us to look in. So these are some of the things that you have to consider. And as things get a little bit tighter with interest rates, like just for instance, 2 months ago, we were at 5.75. If we're at 6.75 now, and it fluctuates a little bit based upon buy downs and stuff, but that's an additional $300 a month, And so when the budget gets tight in those situations, you have to look at some of these things and how you deal with them. Yes. Everybody's question that comes to me is like, well, Lance, when we find these things and they come up, if I'm a seller, when we find these things during a home inspection and I want to keep this buyer in the deal and I know that we can, what do we do? So there's a couple different things. Sometimes we'll use home warranties, because what we're trying to do is give that buyer that trust factor and peace of mind back. So you found some things in the home inspection we didn't know about. It's borderline. They might just be at the end of their useful life, but they might be working fine. But they also could fail in 5 or 6 months. So, think water heater, HVAC. So can we purchase a home warranty that covers some of that risk for the first year so the buyer can get their reserves back up and do some savings? That's one potential thing that we can use, just one of the many tools that we can use. Also, some buyers want to earn some sweat equity, but they just want to be compensated for it. So is there a break in the price? Like, hey, we didn't know about this issue. You work in construction trade, and this is something, Mr. Buyer, that you can fix. How about we just knock $5,000 off the price you can probably fix it for $2,500 yourself, and then we can move forward. So you can make an adjustment there. And then the other thing that you need to consider is just, do we need to fix it? Because there's some things where I talked about that trust factor. There's some things the buyer won't trust, and they don't want to have the unknown unless you go ahead and fix it.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing is stuff you can't see. The hardest thing in these areas are when a home inspector is like, hey, there's moisture behind this wall. We think it's just this little thing, but we don't have x-ray vision. We can't look under there and see. So I need you to open up the wall and see if there is a problem. And when you do, the problem is once you open up that wall as a seller, now what else is wrong in there?
Yeah.
You know, and so, but if the buyer's going to trust you enough to go through with the deal, they need to know you're going to be willing to take that risk to do it. So that's the other big deal. And the other thing that I point out to a lot of people when this starts to happen right now with pricing is all of these things that you want buyers to potentially overlook or consider an additional option for, they all have a cost. And this is the hard part with people pricing. Like there's two houses on a street. One backs up, one's on the left side of the street. It backs up to a busy street. The other one's what we call an interior lot. It just backs up to another house. It's not on the busy street. If somebody is not necessarily doing the best job, they just look for 3-bedroom, 2 baths, and they say, oh, your house on the busy street. Oh, it's a 3-bed, 2 bath. There's 2 others in this neighborhood. It's $400. But those other 2 were interior lots. And right now in this market, if you price like the interior lot ones, you're not going to get that property moved.
Because of the busy street.
There are comps. If you go back and you look, you got to find sold comps on the busy streets, compare those to to other busy streets. Had another guy in my office. He was asking me, well, how much is the shop worth on this property earlier this week? And I said, well, find 3 other of those properties that have garages, and that'll tell you what it's worth. And he's like, well, is the garage the same as a shop? And I said, no, it's not, but it's really freaking close.
Yeah.
So, I was like, so go find 3 others that have a garage, and then we can then start to get a baseline that in all of those cases, those buyers were willing to pay $25,000 more for the ones that had a garage versus the ones that did not. So it's more work, but you really want to get that pricing strategy correct and make sure that you're applying a price to those differences. And especially on the buy side, like as a buyer, if you're going to be willing to overlook that, you need to be compensated for that in that situation. So interestingly enough, what I love about prepping for this show is I always learn something myself too. And some of those statistics are changing a little bit, and your agent needs to know what those are so they're negotiating properly for you. If you have any questions, go to kenmoreteam.com. We'll get you with one of our great agents that know these stats and can get you the best possible deal.